Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. And experts say that relationships are the most important thing in our life. And I think few of us would disagree. My guest, Dr. Gary Lewandowski, is an award winning teacher, researcher, writer, and relationship expert. He is the co host with Adam LaDulce on the hit podcast Love Strategies: Dating and Love Advice for Successful Women. Gary's work has been featured in the Washington Post, Daily Mail, Business Insider, Time, Newsweek, the New York Times, CNN, NPR, and many others. His TED Talk, Breakups Don't Have to Leave You Broken, has been viewed over 2.7 million times. He is the author of Stronger Than You Think. Welcome, Dr. Gary Lewandowski.
Oh, thanks, Tara. Thank you for the fantastic intro. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I love that science always offers us a new perspective. You quote one of my favorite quotes, which is that a change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points.
Yes, absolutely. It's like, it's great when you learn new things. It helps you see the world just a little bit differently.
And when we come to it with the idea that what if everything we knew about relationships was wrong, it opens up our mind to be asking and learning some new things. And you have over 350 citations in here, which are a lot of peer-reviewed journals. So this is a lot of great fodder. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of it in our time together, but I'm super excited. You start out your book with the quote by Ennis Nin, which is well known: "Love never dies a natural death. It dies because we don't know how to replenish its source. It dies of blindness and errors." And then you have David Brooks observing in the New York Times that the most important decision any of us can make is who we'll marry. And yet there's no courses that we have in making this decision. A lot of youngsters these days, well, we're getting older, but people in their 20s, which is a ways back now, feel unprepared for caring, lasting romantic relationships and are anxious in developing them. So I want this time together to include a bunch of myth busting. There's a bunch of myths out there that people are struggling with and have blinders by. So what are some of the biggest myths that, as people are reading your book, discovering the science on relationships, that people are finding helps them navigate this world much better?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you for shouting out the fact that the book has such a large number of scientific studies. 350 studies. It's something I'm actually very, very proud of, because it's hard to get that number of studies in there. And I think in a way where it's not cumbersome, like the reader doesn't, no one reading it actually really ever notices this. I think, I've done a ton of interviews on this book, and I think you're the first one that's ever mentioned the number of citations. So the nerdy science side of me so appreciates you observing that. I really
It's
appreciate it.
really light and fun and conversational. And you have a way of layering in quizzes that we can ask ourselves and learn about ourselves. So yeah, kudos. It's very, very readable.
I appreciate it. I always equate it to, like the trick of, there's these brownies that parents will make for their kids that have broccoli in them, but you don't ever taste the broccoli in the brownie. And it's like the science is the broccoli and the book is the brownie. You don't ever notice it's in there, but it is in there. So I so appreciate you noticing and taking the time to point it out. So you asked about the myths. Really the whole book is surrounded around a bunch of different myths. I guess of all the myths in there, I guess one of my favorites in there is the idea about soulmates, because it's such a romanticized notion about what relationships should be, can be, are. And it's a perfect one in my view, because it's a lot of times people think like a lot of these myths, it's like, oh, well, who cares if you believe this stuff? And soulmates is actually one of the ones that fits in it. It's like, oh, I believe it and it's amazing and it's magical. But if I believe it, it's not true. Like, who cares? But actually the science shows that believing in soulmates can be problematic. It can lead you to break up sooner than you should. And oftentimes, right? It's, because the opposite of having a soulmate belief, where it's like, there's one person for me, you're the only one, we're going to be together forever. The opposite is the, growth mindset, which is we can work it out, which is, we're not going to be perfect all the time. I'm not going to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect. Our union isn't going to be either. And so when we encounter difficulties, we're going to work our way through them. And that's not only more realistic, it's more helpful because that's how relationships are. And it encourages people to work through some of the minor issues that they're inevitably going to encounter on their way.
I love this. Okay, so we often think that self-sacrifice is important in a relationship, but you bring something to light that is just so beautiful. It's the self-expansion model, which you were just checking on, and you talk about Art and Elaine Aron, who back in Berkeley in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Uh, Explored this model, and it's so inherent to all of us that we want to become better people, and
Yeah.
if we're able to experience that in a relationship, that's one of the hallmarks to knowing if your relationship is good. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So Art was actually my graduate school advisor. Him and Elaine, they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary just yesterday. Um, Amazing people. And they were the ones who designed what we call the self expansion model, is just this idea that people have an inherent motivation to become better people, to expand our capabilities, our perspectives, identities, skills, knowledge, all this stuff, because it helps us become more capable. And one of the primary ways that we do that is through our close relationships, most of the time through our romantic relationships. And so essentially, what we're doing when we're looking for a romantic partner is someone's that's going to help us become a better person. And ideally, that's reciprocated. And so, if you have two people who are both looking to help make each other better people, they're going to be better people individually and ideally, synergistically, better people together.
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
Tell us about the Michelangelo effect.
Yeah. So, Michelangelo effect, I mean, a lot of this comes out of this idea of, one of the myths that's in the book is that it's your job to fix your partner. Right. And a lot of people enter relationships thinking, like, okay, they're all right. I like them well enough, but they're not quite perfect. Once I cut this corner and trim this and adjust that, like, I can make them the person I really want to be. And that's not a good way to approach relationships, right? We're much more on the side of unconditional love, right? It's like, I love you for who you are, not for who I wish you would be. However, there is often with a lot of these myths, there's like a little kernel of truth. There is a way that some of this stuff is accurate. And so the Michelangelo phenomenon is, you're not changing your partner. You're like there to assist them to be the person they want to be. And so they're doing all the choosing, they're doing all the changing. You're just there, kind of being like their personal change assistant. Like you're just there to make everything a little bit easier. So, this is where if your partner themselves decide that they want to eat healthier, be on a diet, any become more health conscious, et cetera, you didn't decide it. You're not promoting it. You're not pushing and urging and, maybe guilt tripping along the way. You're cheering them on, and you're also doing some invisible support things, such as just not buying junk food when you're out at the store, not keeping, unhealthy things in the house, right? So you're again supporting role, and it all comes from the Michelangelo phenomenon. Is this idea that everybody has what Michelangelo said, when he was carving the statue, that the marble, he had to scrape away all of the excess to reveal the inner angel that lied within. And so it's more supportive and less agentic in the sense that you're not the one changing them.
You also talk about intimacy, and you have questions in your book that promote intimacy. So, intimacy is not just about spending more time together, but it's actually about having the curiosity to ask questions that allow your partner to open up and share with you who they deeply are. Can you talk some about that? Because that's pretty impactful.
Yeah, so this is another aspect that comes from Art and Elaine. It's what is colloquially known now as the 36 questions. And so To be honest, those 36 questions, there's nothing magical about those specific 36 questions as much as what the magic is being willing earlier, often in relationships, to ask deeper, more impactful questions. So often early relationships, it's an information exchange of basic, superficial, low level information. So, what the 36 questions do is it pushes you towards greater levels of emotional intimacy sooner. Some of that's just basic self disclosure. It's self disclosure of things you may not have told most people, right? So one of the questions is something along the lines of like, when was the last time you cried? Oh yeah, it's not like your standard, what do you do? Well, what's your job? What are your hobbies kind of question. So it tells us a little bit more about the other person. But what's even more important is that if I get asked, when was the last time you cried? And then I self disclose that, by the simple process of me sharing that information with you makes me feel closer to you as the recipient. And so then as I feel closer to you, I am now encouraged to share even more because I just shared something vulnerable about myself and it went okay, assuming it went okay, right? And then it just shows me that I'm with someone that I'm safe with, that I can share more. Then by me sharing such vulnerable information, it encourages you to share vulnerable information. And it just kind of keeps passing back and forth. It's what we call in research, it's mutually transformative. We share, we get closer. As we feel closer, we share more, and around it goes.
And you find that that is well received from men as well as women. Both men and women feel closer asking those intimate questions.
Yeah, I mean, it was originally designed. It's what we call in the research area. It's called the fast friends procedure because originally it was just designed to just build emotional intimacy between any two people, two men, two women, men, women. It didn't matter, but it gained a lot of popularity. Like, it's been featured in New York Times and it was on The Big Bang Theory. Oddly enough, because when Art actually ran the original study, participants, it was males and females, and it was again just supposed to build emotional intimacy. But at least several of the couples fell in love, and at least one eventually got married.
Wow, that's a lot deeper than where'd you grow up and how many brothers and sisters you have.
Yes. Yeah. Are you a firstborn or a secondborn?
And I love that you indicate that having a good, strong relationship or relationships in general is important because loneliness is a risk factor for early death. And it has been likened to being as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or even being obese. So the stakes are high in this.
Yeah, we as humans have a fundamental need to belong. And so, it doesn't mean that we need to spend our time as these amazing extroverts who are always around other people, always the life of the party or anything like that. But what it definitely does mean is that we need people in our life who we can be close to, who we can count on. It doesn't have to be a lot of people, but at least a solid few is really important. So, we just don't want to feel alone. And I think a big part of that is it's just nice to have someone to share your life with. As I say to our clients at Love Strategies all the time, is your primary job in life is to have an amazing life that then you share with somebody else. And they have an amazing life, you have an amazing life, and you build this amazing life together. Because we know, again, the research shows simply having somebody by your side. There's a study where simply having somebody with you made artwork look more beautiful. Simply having somebody by your side made people's judgment of a hill, climbing a hill, just seem easier. It's just there's something about going through life not being alone that just makes it easier.
And you said at the end of your book that the goal of the book is to find and nourish a relationship that's worthy of your time.
Right. And it's like, it's such a simple thing, right? Like, so even when you repeat that, it's like, well, yeah, like part of me thinks like, Doug, Gary, like, why do you even write this kind of stuff? Like, that's so obvious. But yet, some of the most obvious things about relationships, they're important reminders. Like, let's nourish the relationships that are worthy of our time. Because how often, I'm sure you know people, I know I do, who are dragging relationships through the weeks and months and years that have no business surviving. Like they're just willing these like corpses of relationships to life and trying so hard to make these things work. And at some point, it's sad to say, but at some point, there's a little bit of cut your losses and like, let's find. I say this to my students all the time, and I say this to clients all the time. Everyone deserves a great relationship, and not a good one, a great one. And so, like, let's make sure we're nourishing the relationships that are worthy of our time.
And you say in your TED talk that great relationships survive
Hmm.
as they should, and not great relationships tend to disintegrate as they should.
Yeah, yeah.
Why,
I mean,
why do you think your TED talk was so popular? Was it because of that sentiment?
I think so. I think there's not a lot of stuff out there on breakup, scientific stuff at least, that is positive. I know when I first published a study on breakup being positive, I actually did a study first showing how breakup was a positive experience. And I at first couldn't get it published. And so then I had also had data basically from the self-expansion model actually showing that if you lost a self-expanding relationship that was helping you grow, you felt terrible. You lost the sense of self. That had no problem getting published because everyone was really happy to believe that breakups were terrible and you lost yourself. But I also had the data that showed the opposite, which is if you end a relationship that wasn't helping you become a better person, you were better off. Those people reported more positive emotions. They reported more growth from losing a relationship. So there was definitely this idea of addition by subtraction.
And I happen to have that little graph handy here.
Oh, look at you. You came prepared. Look at that.
Yeah, so this is people that you would expect to be sad because they had broken up, and a year later, they were asked how content were they, and for a whopping 41%, the biggest category in this
Mhm.
pie, had a positive response to ending a relationship that wasn't nurturing them, wasn't allowing them to grow and become a better, happier version of themselves.
Yeah. And what I like about that chart is, usually people, when I talk about this, will push back like, well, you mean tell me that breakups aren't negative? I'm like, no, not at all. Because for a third of people, they were very negative. But that's only a third. Like we act like it's 100%. And that's the problem. It's like a third, yes, devastating. And I'm not trying to minimize those experiences. I've been through terrible breakups. I know what that's like. It's horrible, but they're not all bad. And I think there's just something to be said for having a little bit of optimism that it's not always the end of the world because, I think most people, if you look back on the whole entire trajectory of your life, some of the best lessons you've learned have come out of some negative experiences. And I think breakup is really no exception.
And if you were to think of the biggest blinder that people have in finding the right mate, what would come to mind, or the top two or three?
The biggest one for sure that immediately comes to mind is something I do talk about in Stronger Than You Think, which is this idea of prioritizing chemistry over compatibility. And so scientifically, we talk about this in terms of passionate love versus companionate love. And so passionate love is the chemistry. It's that strong physical attraction, the bubbly, excited, energetic, a little unsure that, ooh, do they like me? Do they like me? I hope they like me. Boy, I hope they like me. And it's a little sexual and it is part of falling in love. But I think the biggest mistake people make is they over optimize and over index on that aspect because that part of relationships, it doesn't matter how amazing life is or that person is or that relationship seems, it fades because as humans, we habituate to literally everything, right? I mean, if you jump out of an airplane once, it's going to be really exciting. The 100th time, it's less exciting. It's just how it is as a human being. And so, if you really focus too much on the chemistry aspect, you're going to fall out of love a lot because you're going to be like, 3 months in, as your nervous system has calmed down, you feel more stable and secure in a relationship. You're going to start thinking you've fallen out of love.
So
But
the goal isn't really butterflies and tingly excitement. The goal is more uh, comfort, stability, enjoyment of common values, and sharing your life with somebody. Would that be correct?
100%. Yeah, I mean, well said. It's not the butterflies, it's the stability. It's feeling seen, heard, understood, safe, cared for, right? For people who have had a lot of negative relationships, there's a possibility that that kind of love, which is the desirable kind, will feel a little boring. Like, where's the excitement? Where's all of like the drama? And there isn't any. And that's really is the idea. If you want a long-term fulfilling relationship, it's a warmth, not a heat.
And I thought it was really interesting in the self expansion model that we were talking about earlier that when you have a day or a period of time where you're feeling like you're doing your own self expanding, again, not because you're doing what your partner wants, but because your partner's helping you do what you want, that actually does make you more sexually inclined.
Absolutely, right? And so it's one of the best findings I think in the self-expansion model is that, ideally, yes, I mean, the model says we should self-expand through our partner and that gives us a lot of personal benefits, but there's also benefits to expanding on your own. And there's a spillover effect into the relationship such that, as you mentioned, it increases passion between you. It also just helps each partner is able to do their own thing and then they have different unique new experiences to share with each other versus the couple who spends every last moment together. There's nothing to talk about because we were both there the whole time. And so, sometimes we'll have clients who say, well, what he likes to do, I just don't like to do. I don't like golfing. I don't like to go fishing. I want to go play pickleball. I want to go hang out with my friends that go shopping. And we don't like the same things. And my answer is always the same, which is great. Great. You can each do those separate things, have wonderful days on your own, and then share your wonderful days with each other later that night. And like, hey, honey, what did you do today? Oh, that's a wonderful relationship. You don't have to be completely interlocked and overlapping at all times.
So, what is your comment on the conflicting cliches out of sight, out of mind, and absence makes the heart grow fonder?
It's definitely more absence. As long as it's not as long as it's not enduring and things like that. I actually published a paper with friends of mine about the impact of missing your partner on a relationship. And it shows that it's quite positive. Like the actual name of our paper is Missing Maintains Us because being able to have some time to miss your partner shows you how much you care for your partner. And I share in the book research on massages, which seems like a non sequitur and has nothing to do with relationships. But as I say all the time, I feel like I have a gift for making everything about relationships. But the massage research basically shows that taking a break in the middle of a massage actually makes the whole thing more enjoyable, even though
I've
you get less
never
overall.
experienced that before.
Like, yeah, even though you get less actual time, taking a 5 or 10 minute break in the middle actually makes the whole thing more enjoyable because it gives you a chance to reset, right? Because again, as humans, we habituate to everything. And so just taking breaks is a really positive thing in relationships and in all facets of life.
I believe we call it hedonic adaptation, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely.
So here's another one. Is it good to never have an argument?
I love this one. And I think I feel like I keep saying I love them all because I kind of do. It's like picking your favorite child. But um, so many I'll say people, when people find out what I do, oh, relationships. One of the most common comments I've heard in my lifetime from people who want to be very proud of their relationship to say, I know my partner and I are fantastic. And I was like, oh, really? Like, what makes you know? We've never had a fight. And I politely say, oh, but internally I'm like, oh no, oh no. Because I don't know any two adults, unique individuals who can spend any time together and never have a disagreement. That's impossible. Unless the only way I think for that to happen is if people are unwilling to share their authentic thoughts. It could just be, you know, there's I just if you know who Kylie Kelsey and Jason Kelsey are, she was just talking the other day on her podcast about how they make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? And it's like they have a difference of opinion about how they make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which I think is phenomenal because it's just such a good example. Two people are going to have arguments about things. And so it's not arguing is not the goal. The goal is to have disagreements filled with curiosity, respect, understanding, and compromise. That's the goal. And I was literally just talking today with clients on our mastermind about early in a relationship, don't let a good argument go to waste. In the sense that early in a relationship, it's really easy to be like, that's not a problem. I'm not gonna worry about that. I can let this one go. I'll let it go. I'll let it go because I want to keep the peace and everything's going so well. I don't want to ruin it. Here's the thing, like, you got to figure out how that other person handles disagreement. You want to figure how the two of you can work together to handle this because you might be really good at handling disagreements, right? Like, it's something I feel like I'm pretty good at disagreeing without being disagreeable, right? Not everyone is though, right? Like, some people pout, some people mope around, some people avoid arguing altogether, some people get mean and nasty, some people turn it personal. And so let's figure that stuff out. If we're dating, let's figure that out sooner rather than later.
And I'm guessing if you've got one or both partners that have a real avoidance issue to having conflict and always feel like, they'd rather walk on eggshells than be seen or heard,
Yeah.
that can be a recipe for ending a relationship.
Yeah, which ironically, a lot of the reason why people don't want to have arguments is because they don't want it to threaten the relationship, right? Oh gosh, if we have a disagreement about this thing, that might lead us to breaking up. But if you keep pushing enough of these little things under the rug, eventually all these tiny little things build up. They kind of gang up on you all at once. And it evolves into something I talk about in the book is kitchen thinking, which turns into kitchen sinking, which is this idea of like, you don't say anything until you can't possibly not say anything any longer. And then you just unload and you have this backlog of all the wrongs. And you're just like, and then you did this, and then you did this, and then you did this. And all of a sudden, those tiny little things, which if you had kept small problems small, wouldn't have been threatening at all. But now, all together, it actually is threatening to the relationship. And your partner, the poor other person, they don't know what to do. Now now they're defensive because like, where's all this coming from? They don't even know which problem to address because you just mentioned 10. It's a whole really unhealthy dynamic.
And I love that you referenced John Gottman and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Mhm.
Great stuff there. Contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Yeah.
Excellent predictors to a relationship that isn't going to make it.
Yeah, and it comes down to not arguing. It's not whether you have arguments, it's a lot of how you argue. And so what his research is showing is that there are these aspects that it's really that things that are problematic. So it's not that you have an argument. It's if you're arguing in a contemptuous way where it's like you just have a disdain for your partner. That's a problem, right? And it goes back to what I said about, we want to make sure we're able to argue in a way that's respectful. He also mentioned stonewalling, and sometimes people like to solve their problems by like, we're just not going to talk about this. I'm just not going to deal with this. And that's a problem too, because we need to feel seen and heard and understood. And your partner saying they're unwilling to talk about things all the time, nothing will ever get resolved. And so these kinds of approaches to relationships, it's something, if I say to students all the time when I teach my college course, like the section on communication, getting your communication straight is one of the most important relationship skills you can build because literally every single problem in relationships all have the same initial solution, and that's communication.
Interesting. Um, and another myth that you speak of quite a bit in your book is that men and women are from different planets.
Yeah, this is one where this has been in our culture for decades at this point. I mean, John Gray's book is one of the most influential relationship books out there. And so the general I could talk about this for a long time, but I think the big takeaway in terms of this is a myth. So are men and women different in some ways? Yes. Are they different in all the ways? No. And they're not nearly as different as we think. And so it's like anything about any two people. They're much more similar than they are different. And so men and women, he has a quote in there. It's like men and women think differently, act differently, and they do all. It's like, it's not that stark. They're mostly the same most of the time. But here's the thing, even if it's true, it's not helpful. And it's not helpful because if you believe your counterpart in a heterosexual relationship is literally from a different planet, what motivation do you have to try to work things out with them?
Mm.
You virtually don't. And you are basically telling yourself, like, gosh, if this partner who's a man is terrible and I want my next partner to be a man, what are they going to be? Terrible, because all men are the same and men are different than women. And so it differences create a divide. They don't build closeness. And so what I talk about in the book is it creates what I call a tyranny of low expectations, where you're like, you start falling into like all men syndrome or all women syndrome. Like all men are this way. All men are not capable of sharing their feelings. All men are terrible at communicating, which just frankly isn't true. It might be all men you've dated, it might be all men that you've attracted and tolerated, but it's not all men. And so this idea that, everyone's so different and all this, it's like it's just so counterproductive, but it's also so pervasive. It's probably the myth in the book that people like the least because it's so counter to the programming they've received their entire life.
You have an interesting study in there about babies that are wrapped in a blanket, either a pink blanket or a blue blanket, and how the ones that are wrapped in the pink are perceived and treated in a much more feminine way, where the ones that are wrapped in blue are, regardless of whether it's a girl in a blue blanket or a boy in a pink blanket, it's the color of the blanket that dictates how they're perceived and how they're treated. That was really interesting.
Yeah, and like this is like one of those studies I love, probably because it really speaks to the social psychologist in me, which is that, your upbringing and your surroundings have such a profound impact on us in a way that you really don't recognize. And so, if you say men and women are different and people say, oh, well, they're biologically different, it's like, yeah, that's probably true, but they're also from birth treated very differently.
Mm.
And so it's almost impossible to disentangle what's socialization and what's hardwired biology. And so, if just the color of a blanket changes the way people interact with that child, wow, like just imagine what else has been programmed into us in ways that are not always productive or helpful.
So, what would be the biggest blind spot you feel like most people have once they've gotten into a relationship?
Once that they've gotten into a relationship, it's probably if I had to pick one, it's probably the arguing one, which we already talked about. But the other one is this idea of closeness. People struggle with closeness in the sense that depending on your attachment style, you want way too much, or if you're avoidant, you probably want way too little. And so it's really kind of striking the right balance of vulnerability, openness, and just willing to be close. But the myth in there, I think, is people think you have to spend every minute together, spend all of your time together, everything all the time, constantly, and it's just not true, right? We're much better off having full, complete lives on our own that we can then share with each other.
If you had the world's attention and for 5 minutes, what would be the main things that you'd like to communicate?
Ooh, the whole world's attention for 5 minutes. Uh,
Or maybe 30 seconds or a minute.
okay. So I could talk about this also for a long time, but I think here's the and you kind of touched on this in your intro. It is ridiculous that we don't have some form of serious science-based relationship education in high school. It is madness to me. And if I had more time in my like this is something that at some point when I have more time in my professional life that I'm going to figure out how to problem solve because we spend time with sex ed in high school for obvious reasons. But what I'm fully convinced of is if we actually spent more time with relationship education, we wouldn't need to spend as much time with sex education, right?
Mm.
They go hand in hand. More importantly, if we spent more time with relationship education, it's not only going to help romantic relationships, it's going to save a lot of heartache in young people, but it's also going to help all relationships. Like the number one thing that I hear our clients say to us all the time, which is things along the lines like, I can't believe all this stuff I've learned in this program. I wish I would have known this sooner. Boy, where was this program when I was 17? Where was this program when I was in college? Where was this program? Where was all this knowledge and information when I was fill in the blank, whatever age? The thing is, it's here. It's been there. It's always been available. It's just not used. And so this has very much been my own personal mission is like, how can we use science to help make people's lives better in relationships? And it's like, why not start? It's that whole like ounce of prevention kind of thing. Like, let's get people when they're 15, 16 and really get in there with some of the high quality stuff that we know that makes relationships work so we can help them avoid what ends up being decades for some people of just trial and error and heartbreak and heartache. It's just it's silly to me, and yet it's one of those things. I know it's a good idea because it's so obvious, right? All the best ideas are the obvious ones, and so it's just so world, if you're hearing this, that's what we need.
And a big part of that is having solid boundaries, isn't it? Because it seems like it also seems like there's a tremendous amount of disinformation out there. People are interested in relationships, but if you're just going on YouTube and listening to X, Y, or Z, you're probably more than likely to get bad information than solid information.
Yeah, and some of it's just out and out bad and manipulative. But then I think there's just a whole bunch of well-intentioned but misinformed information. Some advice, so like how we started with soulmates. I think a lot of people like, oh, find your soulmate. Like that's so well-intentioned. It's just not super helpful.
So
And
there's a lot of
so
people when they meet that sometimes don't even particularly aren't all that attracted to each other and grow in attraction because of the in common values and life goals. Can you talk about that?
yeah, I mean, it's people focus on the start of the relationship because those are usually the good times. It's very natural to focus on the start. But the starts of relationships aren't all that special because it's almost always pretty good. It's how that relationship grows over time. And especially to your point, people, once you get to know someone better and better, they become more attractive to you. And so that focus on connection and compatibility is actually the stuff that long-term relationships are built on.
And one thing I've gleaned from you, knowing your work for so long, that when you're with somebody and they do treat you well, they do have good values. If you built into it, if you bake into it, that becomes attractive to you, rather than the behavior that might be counterproductive to a relationship over time. Things that might feel hot or sexy early on. It's not hot or sexy when you have to run a schedule, run a business, raise kids.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, so it's like my favorite example is early in relationships, we all kind of like that person who's a little mysterious, right? We like them and we want to spend all of our time with them. And we're so eager for their attention that if they're a little aloof, a little mysterious, it just makes us want to more. It's like the slot machine that we don't know when it's going to hit, but when it hits, the dopamine rush is going to be amazing. And that's awesome. But you know what's not great? Having someone who's mysterious and aloof when you're trying to pay the bills, right? We don't want the mystery being like, are they going to be here? Are they going to show up? Like, what kind of person am I going to be dealing with today? It's something that we have to realize. And this is another thing that sounds so obvious, but people really don't put this into practice. How we date sets up the relationship that forms. And some people date in a way where it's like, I want excitement and I want to go on all these cool dates and it needs to look a little bit like The Bachelor. Like, that's amazing. It's like, what kind of relationship does that set you up for?
Sounds
Not
like
necessarily.
sounds like Brenda and Eddie from that Billy Joel song.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the king and the queen of the prom.
Yeah.
If I
So
could, hey, Tara, can I just go back to one thing?
yeah.
Um, because you kind of got me on this high school relationship education thing. And so one thing I would just add to that whole train of thought is so much of relationship training at the high school level wouldn't even be about relationships themselves. It'd be about teaching people to be more self-confident, more self-assured, more fully and completely their own person. Because one of the biggest mistakes people make, but especially young people make, is trying to use relationships to fix their own problems. Right? There's this idea of like, I'm going to have a relationship and like you complete me,
Yeah.
you help me, you get me through these things. And it's those relationships are inevitably problematic because broken people attract broken people. And if you're not fully complete and happy as a person, what kind of person is attracted to somebody who's not full and complete and happy with themselves? It's not the greatest kind of partner. And it's like that, just that is like a light bulb kind of realization that if we can talk to people and teach people about being more empowered and confident in themselves and really building that solid foundation, you're just going to automatically attract better people into your life.
That makes a ton of sense.
So yeah, it's like one of like one of my little pet things that it's something we talk about at Love Strategy all the time. Our entire program is around this idea of you become an amazing person and then the rest takes care of itself.
Yeah, and
And
that can
so
happen with a relationship or without a relationship. You can
right,
actually
and that's the thing.
there's no bad time to improve yourself.
Right. Like there's absolute the return on investment of improving yourself, you're not going to ever lose. And the people that become attracted to you when you're not ready are not good for you. And it's I'm telling you, it's like one of the biggest light bulb moments that I see clients have over and over again.
I always remembered the Benjamin Franklin quote from when I was growing up: "Pour your money into your brain, because that way nobody can steal it from you."
Oh, I had not heard I've never heard that one. Ben Franklin, man, he's always got good ones.
So here's another interesting sort of myth thing. Is it better to get your partner's support during good times or bad times?
It's both, but it's more important during good times, which is not what people expect. We always think of needing our partner when we're stressed, when we have problems, and we definitely need our partner to support them. Thankfully, the way life generally works is the bad times aren't as numerous as the good times. And so sometimes we have this amazing capacity really to take the good times for granted. But what we know from relationship research is we want to engage in what researchers call capitalization. Capitalization is celebrating the good stuff. Like we want to be really good at focusing our energies on positive things because those happen more. And I know some people listening to this be like, well, no, that doesn't really happen that much. It does. Sometimes you just make it up, right? In the sense that, when you're early on in your dating life, I know I did this with my wife before we were married. It's like you have a celebration every month. This is our 1 month anniversary. This is our 2 month anniversary, 3 month. And it's like, do you have to do that? Are those real things? No. But it's an excuse to celebrate. It's an excuse to catch yourself in good moments and have those good experiences together. And so there's a lot more positive stuff going on in our relationship and individual lives that we just have to be good at catching those moments.
Really well said. What you put your attention on gets your energy, right? So if
Yeah.
you focus on the good, then there's more there to be had.
Yeah. And it's, and one of the funny things about that research is they show there's a lot of ways that when good things happen to our partner, we're not as supportive as we think we are.
Mm.
Right. It's like your partner gets a promotion at work and they come home and like, guess what? I got this amazing promotion at work. And your partner says, well, that's great. Are you sure you can handle it? Isn't that going to be stressful? And it's well intentioned. But again, it's a little misinformed in the sense that like, no, read the room. Like they were excited. Like let's be excited for them. Like it's about them. Like let's share in their joy and capitalize on the positive emotions. We might have a conversation later about the potential downsides and things, but that's not the time or the place. Like let's be sensitive. And one of the things I call a relationship superpower is the ability to take perspective, and that perspective taking, seeing that experience through your partner's eyes. Imagine how deflating that would be.
Mm.
Honey, I did this great thing. I did this great thing. Isn't that going to be terrible for you in some ways? Huh? Not good.
Read the room. Read the room.
Yeah, for sure.
If you could, actually, so when you wrote your book, what were some of the most moving stories you heard from people whose lives were transformed by it?
Um, It's interesting because who I wrote the book for, I can't think of like a specific example, but one of the big underlying themes of the book and the premise of the book is this idea that your relationship is stronger than you think. And so that of course that's the title, but it's this idea that sometimes people have a little bit of relationship imposter syndrome where they're in a relationship that's actually really, really good, but they don't necessarily give it the credit it deserves. And
Mm.
so I have had many people reach out to me to let me know that essentially this book saved their relationship, saved their marriage. I thought things were terrible. Wow, didn't realize these things I was doing and these things that I thought were problems weren't really problems. And I think for that, it's amazing. I also think it's and that's why I kind of paused earlier because I feel like now have heard more from people who aren't even in relationships who have read it, which wasn't necessarily even the target market. But people who are dating say it's just like this amazing roadmap to learn the terrain, so to speak. It's like this if by learning about what's ahead, you can better navigate dating because you're more prepared to deal with the first argument, the desire to want to change somebody, the dealing with chemistry, the kitchen sinking, and all these other things that the book talks about, which was a little bit unexpected. I hadn't thought of it that way, which maybe was a short sightedness on my part.
That makes me think of something else you have in the book that's really valuable. Who's the best judge of whether a relationship will be successful, you or the people around you?
It's a great one because everyone thinks it's them, right?
Because
And
you have the
it's
most exposure to it, right?
yeah, you have the most like you have more inside information than literally anybody. It's your relationship. Who are the other people in your life to judge whether your relationship's going to be good or not? Except for the research shows you're actually the worst. You're the worst because you're the least accurate and the most confident in your inaccuracy, which is like literally the worst possible combination. The people who have the most insight are your close friends. The people who are close to they've heard you share about your relationship, but they've also seen some things firsthand that maybe you wouldn't have shared. They see how you and your partner interact together. They might have seen you after you've had a fight with your partner. They just get a little bit more information. And the real benefit of friends is they only care about you. They are completely looking out for you. They don't care about your partner. And so the ironic thing in relationships is we end up caring a lot more about our partner sometimes than ourselves. But our most important relationship that's going to be with us our whole entire life is with ourselves. And so it's hard sometimes for us to put ourselves first, but like particularly females, your female best friend, she's got your back, right? And she doesn't care about him or whoever your partner is. Like she cares about you and taking care of you. And what a nice ally to have.
If you could go back in time and for 5 minutes talk to 10-year-old Gary Lewandowski, what would you say?
Oh, um, I think I mean, this is maybe not the direction you're going with this, but I think I would say you're not going to believe the life you're going to have. In the sense of like a 10-year-old me never would have imagined that I spend my time talking about relationships and positive relationships and all this stuff. I mean, 10-year-old Gary would have been pretty disappointed I didn't turn out to be a professional baseball player.
Good one. Garrett, I so appreciate you taking the time to be here on Next Level Healing. How can people find you, stay in touch with you, follow you? What are the best modes for people to do that?
Sure. So probably the best way is my website, psychologyofrelationships.com. And then I'm also on social media at Lewandowski, PhD.
Fantastic. Well,
Oh,
thank
and
you.
also you mentioned this, but also I do the Love Strategies podcast. So once, several times a week, we put out a podcast helping women, successful women, find love through scientific-based strategies.
And you guys are wildly successful. You have a lot of viewers and listeners.
It's fun. It is the most fun thing I do, I think, every week. Just hanging Adam, him and I just kind of talking about relationships and helping people just see the world differently and just approach relationships in a smarter way.
And you guys are a wonderful foil for each other. He's the big brother that has your back and has coached men, which I think is a wonderful insight for women because we get to learn about what men are looking for, and what the pool of men looking for women is like out there, and what we're missing. So that's all very fascinating. And then you bring all this amazing scientific research to it, which I agree with you. It should be taught in high schools. It's too valuable a life experience to leave to chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Thanks, Gary.
All
Folks, hit the subscribe button, send us a note, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing.
This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions are expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.